The Worst Witch and the Wishing Star by Jill Murphy. Chapter 1. Squalling rain and biting wind buffeted the pupils of Miss Cackle's academy as they struggled to reach the school in time for the first day of the winter term. The girls' cloaks kept blowing inside out, then flapping round their faces like wet flannels, and most of the older pupils, who were expected to keep the cats sitting on their brooms at all times, had given up and crammed the cats into their baskets for safety. Mildred Hubble, who was not one of the best flyers in the school, was valiantly trying her best to keep Tabby, her nervous striped cat, perched on the broom just in case anyone was watching when she arrived. She had wedged Tabby between her back and a laundry bag stuffed with books, and she could feel his claws through her gym slip as the unruly cloak flapped and whirled above her shoulders. "Ouch!" she yelled. "It's all right, Tab. We're nearly there. Hang on just a teeny bit longer. Ow! I didn't mean literally hang on. Ouch! Mildred was quite right to be careful. Someone was watching. Miss Cackle, their kindly headmistress, and Miss Hardbroom, her ferocious second-in-command, were lurking just out of sight in Miss Cackle's study, watching from the window as the girls wobbled or zoomed, depending on the gusting wind, over the wall and into the concrete playground. "Well, just look at that, Miss Hardbroom," exclaimed Miss Cackle. "Mildred Hubble is the only senior pupil to have her cat on the broom, as stated in the regulations." Said Miss Hardbroom. "Don't get too excited, Miss Cackle. I'm sure she'll manage some little disaster before too long. She usually does." Now, Miss Hardbroom," chided Miss Cackle. "It's the first day of term, and we must begin it with hope in our hearts, even when contemplating one of our more challenging pupils." Down in the windswept courtyard, Miss Bat and Miss Maud were huddling beneath a huge dripping umbrella in the shelter of the castle wall, directing the pupils to put any free-roaming cats into their baskets, leave everything in the cloakrooms and go straight to the Great Hall, as it was obviously far too wet to assemble in the playground. As usual, the first years, who seemed smaller with each passing year to Mildred and her friends, arrived on foot, looking bedraggled and terrified as they entered the prison-like school and heard the gate clang shut behind them. To the flying pupils' horror, the playground was full of puddles, so that the relief of ever arriving in one piece was ruined as the girls swooped and hovered, desperately trying to avoid landing in the water. One of the first rules of broomstick management is that brooms are badly affected if they are too near the surface of a large amount of water, which can make them stop working abruptly, and the last thing that anyone wanted was to crash land in a puddle on the very first day. Mildred was delighted to land safely, well clear of a deep puddle to her left. She jumped off and commanded the broom to wait and hover while she reached around and detached Tabby, claw by claw, from his rucksack-like position under her cloak. She shoved him back onto the broom next to the laundry bag, just in time to grab her best friend Maud, who had made it safely over the wall, but was now heading for a small lake along the edge of the playground. Maud was completely tangled up in her cloak, and Mildred managed to catch her in the nick of time. "Hold on, Maud!" yelled Mildred, flinging an arm around Maud's waist and restraining the broom with the other. "Tell it to stop, or you'll end up in that huge puddle." "Stay, broom!" shrieked Maud, unwrapping the cloak from her head and seizing her best friend in a bear hug. "Thank goodness, you saw me, Mill. You saved my bacon." Unfortunately, they were not quick enough to save their friend Enid, who lurched suddenly over the wall in an uncontrollable nosedive straight into the lake of water which Maud had managed to avoid. "Oh no!" cried Enid, spraying a plume of water behind her as she collapsed into a messy heap of bags and cat basket, with her cloak billowing up around her on the surface of the puddle. "Now, everything's ruined. Just look at it all." Enid's cat, who was locked in the basket, was yowling his head off as the water seeped in around his paws. The broomstick was floating in the water, looking as if it would never do anything magic again, and Enid, though trying to keep calm, had burst into tears. Mildred and Maud helped Enid to her feet and dragged all her luggage clear of the huge puddle as quickly as possible. "It's all right, Enid," said Maud reassuringly, wringing out the hem of her friend's dripping cloak. "It's not as bad as it looks, and your broom will be fine as soon as it's dried out." "Hey, you two!" said Mildred suddenly. "Nice to see you again." She held her arms out, and the three best friends flung their arms around each other and jumped about in the rain, unexpectedly pleased, despite the horrible weather and the long winter term ahead, that they were back together again, come what may. Chapter 2. Mildred couldn't help feeling secretly thrilled that she wasn't the one squelching and dripping up the stairs as they made their way from the cloakrooms to the Great Hall. If anyone made a dramatic entrance to Miss Cackle's on the first day of term, it was usually Mildred, and she felt grateful for her perfect landing, especially in front of all those juniors, blowing around the playground like dustbin lids on a windy, rubbish day. "Do you think anyone saw?" asked Enid anxiously, wringing the last drops of water from her long, thick plait. "I don't honestly think it matters too much," said Maud kindly. People were plummeting into puddles all over the place, especially the younger ones. They can't give the entire school a detention in the first 5 minutes. Maud's right, agreed Mildred, feeling happy to be in the unusual position of offering comfort to someone else. It's not our fault that the school's on top of a mountain. The weather's nearly always doing something horrible up here. Do you remember once when there was a blizzard on the first day of summer term? And it was a day like this, continued Maud, when Mildred rescued her tortoise from the top of the pine tree outside the school gates. Gales and rain are part of the deal up here. Enid, no one will give a hoot about anyone in particular on such a ghastly first day. Did you notice anything unusual in the playground? Asked Mildred, changing the subject. We were all so busy trying not to crash that it's only just dawned on me. Not really, said Maud. Everything looked the same as ever. What was it? I've just realised that Miss Drill wasn't there, continued Mildred. She's always the first person you see when you arrive, standing there in her gym kit, bossing everyone about and shepherding the new arrivals. But this time it was Miss Bat and Mouldy. Mouldy was the girl's nickname for Miss Mould, the art mistress. Perhaps she's not well, suggested Enid, or she might have retired. She looks quite old. They all look quite old, commented Mildred. I don't think Miss Drill is older than anyone else. Anyway, it doesn't really matter where she is. We only have her for gym 3 or 4 times a week. All those broomstick exercise routines and cross-country runs. Ugh. Perhaps we'll get a new gym mistress, said Enid. A new one might be worse, said Maud. She might be young and keen. Or older and more crotchety, laughed Mildred. They had reached the doors of the great hall, which were propped open so that the girls could pass inside more quickly. Mildred linked arms with her 2 best friends. Here we go again, she said. Time to find out what's in store for us this year. Chapter 3. The first thing that Mildred noticed as the new Form 4 shuffled into line and glanced up at the teacher's platform was Miss Drill, dressed in a grey tweed suit and a purple blouse, her wavy grey hair scragged into an untidy French plait instead of her usual jaunty ponytail. Look at Miss Drill, whispered Mildred to Maud. I've never seen her out of shorts. Doesn't it look strange to see her in a proper outfit? Enough chatting, girls, warned Miss Hardbroom. Get into your places at once. You've had long enough to greet each other and calm down after your extremely disorderly arrival. Don't think I didn't notice the puddle incident, Enid Nightshade. Not a very good start, even if the weather has been a trifle extreme. Enid closed her eyes as if in pain. Welcome back, girls, beamed Miss Cackle, taking over hastily from her second-in-command before the whole school was plunged into a state of terrified misery. I'm sure the dreadful weather hasn't been much help to any of us. Not to worry. There are many exciting new announcements to warm your hearts on this first day of the winter term, including a brilliant opportunity for one lucky witch's school. And I sincerely hope it will be this one, to win a new indoor swimming pool. There were gasps of delighted amazement from the girls. There now, continued Miss Cackle, clapping her hands together gleefully, like a little girl. I knew that would cheer you all up. I thought we were saving that piece of information until the end of all the other announcements, muttered Miss Hardbroom. Oh dear, Miss Hardbroom, mumbled Miss Cackle. You're quite right, as usual. I'm afraid I got a bit carried away. I've been longing to tell the girls all about it. Perhaps you could take over and, Certainly, said Miss Hardbroom crisply. Now then, girls, there are several new things to tell you about. First of all, Miss Drill has decided to give up her position as gym mistress due to a knee injury sustained during her annual rock-climbing summer holiday. Not wishing to lose such a dedicated teacher, we have persuaded Miss Drill to stay on as a class teacher to this year's Form 4. We are trying hard to find a new gym mistress for later in the term, so Form 4 can count themselves lucky that Miss Drill will be able to keep them fit and healthy until gym classes are up and running again. Maud and Enid glanced sideways at Mildred, who was looking desperate. During the holidays, said Miss Hardbroom, there have been exciting improvements in all the bedrooms. Glass has been fitted in every pupil's window. There were whoops of joy from the entire school, except the bewildered first-years who had no idea that their bedrooms would not have had proper windows in the first place. But there was great rejoicing from all the old hands as they imagined snuggling up in a cosy bed without rain and wind blowing onto their pillows. In particularly bad weather, they had all had to move their beds away from the open stone windows. Settle down now, girls, barked Miss Hardbroom. What is it, Mildred? Mildred had put up her hand. Excuse me, Miss Hardbroom, she began shyly, as everyone turned to look at her. I was just wondering how the bats are going to get in and out. Miss Cackle smiled and put a staying hand on Miss Hardbroom's arm to show that she would answer the question. I knew you'd be anxious about that, Mildred, said Miss Cackle. Don't worry, my dear. We've put a small swinging flap on each window. A sort of bat flap, you might say. We've already checked, and they've obviously got used to the idea. The usual flurry flock was huddled along your picture rail when I last looked. Thank you, Miss Cackle, said Mildred, breathing a sigh of relief. Would you like to carry on with the final announcement, Miss Cackle? Asked Miss Hardbroom, sounding a little tetchy. Or shall I? Actually, Miss Hardbroom, said Miss Cackle, feeling braver than usual, I think I will, if you don't mind. Of course I don't, said Miss Hardbroom primly. You are the headmistress, Miss Cackle. Well then, girls, said Miss Cackle, looking quite radiant. This brings me on to the swimming pool competition, and not just any old outdoor freezing cold swimming pool, but an indoor one, to be used all year round. Such a magnificent prize. Goodness me, we will all be so fit. We have to actually win the competition first, Miss Cackle, said Miss Hardbroom, sourly, which will mean weeks of diligent practice, not to mention coming up with a prize-winning idea in the first place. Yes, of course, Miss Hardbroom, said Miss Cackle. I was coming to that in a moment. Not a moment too soon, if you ask me, said Miss Hardbroom, her piercing gaze managing to convince every pupil that she was looking into their very soul. There will be a great deal of extra work involved in getting the competing pupils up to scratch if we are to be in the running for such a prize. Thank you, Miss Hardbroom, said Miss Cackle tactfully. I hope you were listening, girls. The competition is between all the witches' schools in the country, and we have some very stiff competition, especially as there seem to be new schools for sorcery popping up like mushrooms these days. Miss Pentangle's Academy is a strong contender, and Moonridge High School is also doing rather well. The details of the competition are to be found on the notice board in the passageway next to the cloakrooms, to be discussed with your form teachers tomorrow. Also there, you will find the lists giving certain selected pupils their form tasks. Read them well. We expect any pupil lucky enough to have been chosen to take her task seriously, to ensure the smooth running of everyday life at Miss Cackle's Academy, the best witches' academy in the land. Miss Cackle smiled happily down at her girls, who all realised that they could risk cheering and looking happy for a brief moment before Miss Hardbroom brought them back down to earth. To conclude, said Miss Hardbroom, motioning to the girls to be silent, you may spend the next few hours drying out your clothes and tending to your cats in your rooms. First years, let's stay behind, and I will explain the rules so that you will know where you cannot go and what you are not allowed to do. Miss Bat? Miss Bat, the chanting mistress, who was beginning to look more scruffily vague with each passing year, seated herself at the ancient piano and began to play a stirring piece of music. Mildred would never have admitted it, but the strident rhythm of the piano lifted her spirits as she marched her way out of the great hall and into the new term. Chapter 4. Let's go and check out the tasks, said Maud, as they clattered down the stairs. I think we get more difficult stuff now that we're in Form 4, said Enid gloomily. Well, I hope I haven't got anything at all, said Mildred. Hello, you three, said someone coming up behind them, draping an arm around Mildred and Maud's shoulders. Oh, hello, Ethel, said Mildred, turning to see that it was indeed Ethel, her least favourite person. We were just wondering what our tasks might be. I hope I've got first-year mentors, said Ethel. Oh, they're all so gullible, and it would be brilliant scaring the wits out of them and sending them off on the wrong errands. That's not very nice, Ethel, said Enid. Anyway, they'll want someone kind and helpful as their mentor, not a meanie like you, and HB knows what you're like after you pinched Mildred's project last term. That was just a silly misunderstanding, snapped Ethel. She didn't need to make such a stupid fuss about it. It was only a joke that got out of hand. No, it wasn't, exclaimed Mildred indignantly. HB caught you fair and square, so you'll have to watch what you're doing from now on, just like the rest of us. Oh, keep your hair on, snapped Ethel. You always get in such a state about everything. They had reached the passageway, where the list of tasks were pinned up on a long notice board. There was already a large crowd of girls pushing and jostling and standing on tiptoe, trying to see if their names were on the list. I really hope I haven't been chosen for anything, said Mildred, keeping her fingers tightly crossed. Don't worry, Mill, said Maud, giving her friend's hand a squeeze. You'll probably get blackboard monitor. Even a first year could rub out the last lesson, ready for the next. Meanwhile, Miss Cackle was sitting in the staff room having a cup of tea and a macaroon with Miss Hardbroom. I do hope we've done the right thing, choosing Mildred for the East Wing Lantern monitor, said Miss Cackle, dipping the macaroon into the tea, holding it there until it was just about to dissolve, and then hastily popping it into her mouth. It's quite a big responsibility for such a scatterbrain, and she's always been a bit scared of the dark. Nonsense, Miss Cackle, said Miss Hardbroom. It's not as if she's being given the entire school. She'll just have 3 corridors of bedrooms, the spiral stairs, passages to the cloakrooms, the hallway inside the main door, and the 2 large lanterns on the school gates. As long as she sets off at twilight and lights her way out to the gates, everything will be shining brightly to light her back in again. You make it sound so simple, Miss Hardbroom, said Miss Cackle, who had misjudged the macaroon dipping and dropped a glutinous lump down her front. Oh dear, what a mess I've made. She removed it with a handkerchief, inadvertently crushing it into her dress, and put what remained of it into her saucer. I suppose you're right, Miss Hardbroom. Which girls are doing the west wing and all the upper floors? Ethel Hallow and Drusilla Paddock, said Miss Hardbroom, so at least 2/3 of the school will be efficiently lit. Anyway, I've made sure that each have a bag full of safety equipment to take with them, so please don't worry yourself, Headmistress. All will be well. I sincerely hope so, Miss Hardbroom, sighed Miss Cackle. Perhaps Mildred will be glad of the responsibility now that she's a senior pupil. Chapter 5. Mildred was most definitely not glad to be given the responsibility of lantern monitor. The girls had been allowed to spend the rest of the day unpacking and arranging their rooms, and Maud and Enid had bundled in with Mildred to discuss their tasks. It's not fair, said Mildred, sitting huddled on her bed with Tabby and her 2 friends. I bet HB did it on purpose. It's not actually that bad, said Enid reassuringly. You've only got the east wing and the playground. If you set off just before it gets dark and light your way out, it'll be nice and bright when you come back in again. Anyway, grumbled Mildred, I'll have to get up at dawn and go around and douse all the candles, so while you're all slumbering in your warm beds, I'll be freezing to death going around all those creepy corridors by myself. You're so lucky, Maud, getting first-year mentor. Well, at least I've saved the little dears from Ethel's clutches, laughed Maud. She and Drusilla are lantern monitors for the rest of the school. What exactly is first-year mentor? Asked Enid. Just keeping an eye on the first years, said Maud, making sure no one's too homesick, etc. They all look such babies, don't they? Do you remember how we felt when we first arrived? Everything went wrong every 5 seconds, said Mildred. Tell Enid about the dustbin incident, Mill, said Maud. She wasn't here when it happened. She didn't come until the summer term. I think I'd rather not, said Mildred gloomily. Oh, go on, Millie, encouraged Enid. Please tell. Well, said Mildred, we were having our very first flying lesson on the second day, and I got a bit overconfident and crashed into the dustbins and broke my broom. It's been the same ever since, really, one disaster after another. Not all the time, said Maud in her usual cheery way. You've done loads of good things, Millie. I'm not quite sure how exactly, but things often go wonderfully right in the end for you, even if it's usually the long way round. Well, I'd like the short way round this time, said Mildred. Did you get a task, Enid? Flower monitor, said Enid. You know, beautifying the classroom. It says that I have to use my initiative and find sprays of buried leaves and pine cones if there aren't any actual flowers at this time of year. Just at that moment, the bats, who had been hanging upside down along the picture rail, snuffling and quivering in their sleep, began waking up and stretching their wings in the darkening room. Fortunately, Mildred's task didn't start until the following night, making this her last free evening until the next school holidays. There were now 8 bats in Mildred's room, forming a good-sized colony, and the girls watched fascinated as they headed for the newly glazed window, neatly nudging the bat flap open with their grey, furry heads, one by one, and disappearing into the twilight. How amazing, said Mildred. I really thought they wouldn't like using the bat flap. You know how well they avoid bashing into things with their radar. It's finally stopped raining, said Maud, peering out of the window. The sky is completely cleared, and you can see the stars beginning to twinkle. Oh, look, Maud, exclaimed Mildred. There's a shooting star, over there behind the gates. It's sort of tumbled down the sky. Quick, Mildred, said Enid, and make a wish, and don't tell us what it is, or it won't come true. And be careful what you wish for, warned Maud. Mildred closed her eyes and wished. Chapter 6. The teachers had gathered in the staff room to deal with the problems that always needed ironing out on the first day back. It was also an opportune moment to have a calming cup of tea and a biscuit, or several biscuits in Miss Cackle's case. Everything seems to be running smoothly, Miss Cackle, said Miss Bat, dropping a handful of tea bags into an enormous teapot. Though I must say, Miss Drill, you were sorely missed helping with the first years, especially in such dreadful weather. I quite missed them myself, said Miss Drill, repinning a fallen clump of her springy hair, though I am looking forward to being class teacher to Form 4. Luckily, I'll have Ethel Hallow to get things off to a good start. Unluckily, you'll also have Mildred Hubble, said Miss Hardbroom dryly, so goodness knows what will be waiting around the corner. Look, everyone, said Miss Cackle, swiftly changing the subject. The horrible weather's completely changed. The sky is so clear now, you can even see the stars coming out. Miss Hardbroom craned her neck and peered out into the gathering gloom. Did you see that? She said. A shooting star just zipped across the sky, over there behind the gates. Oh, you must make a wish, exclaimed Miss Cackle. Quickly, Miss Hardbroom, or it won't come true. Oh, really, Miss Cackle, said Miss Hardbroom grumpily. Surely you don't believe in all that silly nonsense. It is not silly nonsense, replied Miss Cackle indignantly. Didn't you ever make a birthday wish when you blew out the candles on your cake? We didn't have birthday candles in our house, said Miss Hardbroom, sounding briefly wistful. Our cakes, or cards, or anything frivolous, and we only had one present, usually something useful. such as a new spell book, not like nowadays when they have so many presents that they need a forklift truck to get them all home. The other teacher stared at Miss Hardbroom, imagining her as a child in a sensible black party dress, clutching her one present to her chest. It suddenly explained a great deal about her character. "Come along now, Miss Hardbroom," continued Miss Cackle brightly. "Make a wish anyway, just to prove it, one way or another." "Oh yes, Miss Hardbroom," giggled Miss Bat. "That would be such fun. Do make a wish." "All right then," said Miss Hardbroom, feeling unexpectedly caught up in the spirit of fun and camaraderie between her fellow teachers. "If it means so much to all of you." "You have to close your eyes," said Miss Cackle. "And don't tell us what you've wished," said Miss Drill, "or it won't come true." Miss Hardbroom closed her eyes and wished. After a few seconds she opened one eye and glanced at her fellow teachers. "What do I do next?" she asked earnestly. "Nothing at all, Miss Hardbroom," said Miss Cackle, stifling a smile. "Oh," said Miss Hardbroom, feeling a little disappointed, as she had rather hoped for some sort of magic to accompany the wish. "Right then, ladies," she continued primly, her sense of fun departing as suddenly as it had arrived. "Enough silly nonsense. We have a very arduous term in front of us, and only hard work and planning can keep us ahead of all the other schools if we want to win this competition."